I'd like to welcome you to the NetScout OneTouch AT training. My name's Mike Pennacchi, and I'm going to be your instructor. So just a tiny bit of background about me before we get rolling. I own a company called Network Protocol Specialist here in Seattle, Washington. I've been working with this line of tools since probably the late 90s. I started out actually as a customer using one of the first pieces of equipment that came out. If you have an OptiView XG, I developed the training on the OptiView many years ago, constantly updating that, and just got done putting together the training on the OneTouch AT G3. So I use this equipment to go out and help people troubleshoot problems as well as doing training on it. So the big thing here is I'm not just a trainer. I use this equipment. I give feedback to NetScout on what could be better about this equipment. So I want to see a really good test tool here, and I believe that we really do have a phenomenal test tool when it comes to the OneTouch AT. I've been out troubleshooting networks for the last 25 years. I've been an instructor at Interop here in the States, teaching people how to use, do network troubleshooting for the last 20 years. I started out as a LAN administrator. I suffered all these same problems when it came to going in and troubleshooting issues and things like that. And at that time, I was looking for a tool to help me get to the root of those problems faster. So my big focus is helping make sure that you get the information and the skills necessary to get the most out of this equipment. I hate nothing more than to see one of these pieces of equipment sitting in somebody's desk drawer. This is something that we can use day in, day out for validating and troubleshooting. And in fact, that is something I'm going to really harp on as we go through our training today. And that is how we can use the OneTouch AT G3 to validate that things are working properly. Because if we do that validation properly, in many cases, we won't get to the troubleshooting part of it. But when we do get to the troubleshooting part, we'll look at where that comes in for us there. My email address is mike@nps-llc.com. You've probably received a couple of email addresses or emails from me. And I've got this LinkedIn group called the Protocol Analysis and Troubleshooting Group. If you're interested in that, I've got that out there. Now I'll tell you what, let me do one thing before we go any further. And I'm going to come into my OneTouch training here, and I'm going to grab this file. Now I just drug a PDF up to the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Now that is going to appear on yours in just a second. It's about 75% uploaded. I'll let you know when it hits 100 here. All right, so that's 100% uploaded. So in the GoToWebinar handout section, you're going to find a PDF. That PDF has all these course materials in it. So you can use that as a reference to go back. In fact, many of the things that I will step through here are good things to go back and take a look at if you have any questions. So I wanted to make sure that you got the presentation for the class we're doing today. All right, so here's the piece of equipment we're going to look at. So what are some of the features of the OneTouch AT Network Assistant that we're going to be looking at today? Well, we can use it for troubleshooting copper, fiber, or wireless. So just to show you, and we'll come back in here, we'll flip over to the unit. Up on the top, we're going to be digging into this thing. But what we're going to find is that we've got two SFP connections right here, two copper connections. We've got our antenna connection right there for our wireless. So we're going to be able to use this to go out and get in line with a fiber connection, with a copper connection, or we're going to be able to use it to capture and analyze wireless traffic. We're going to find that this piece of equipment fits into whatever type of troubleshooting we need to do as far as getting connected. Now this particular unit that I have here supports 10, 100, 1000. Now, well, there's not a lot of differences. I will grab the OneTouch AT 10G module that I've got, and that supports 100, 1000, and 10 gig. We're going to look at that one just a little bit and talk about where that could come in for helping us troubleshoot our problems. Also for being able to validate and make sure things are working okay on 10 gig. We're going to find that this piece of equipment has configurable profiles. And those profiles are something that we're going to spend some time taking a look at. And the advantage of the profile is that once we get this piece of equipment set up exactly the way we want it, we can save that as a profile. And we can take that profile and we can push it out to other OneTouch ATs. So by being able to push that profile out, if I had a large organization and I wanted to be able to do some validation, say for a new application I was deploying, I could go in and I could create that profile centrally and then send that profile out to everybody that has a OneTouch AT within my organization, have them load that profile and be able to run those tests. Okay? So one of the questions, just that I am paying attention to these, is does the OneTouch AT G3 support I'm guessing it's 10 gig SFP modules? It does not. So the OneTouch AT G3 only supports 1 gig. Well, I believe we can do 100, but we can also do it mainly supports 1 gig SFPs. If we want to do a 10 gig SFP plus, then we're going to need to use the OneTouch AT 10G module. And when we take a break, and we're going to take breaks about every 50 minutes, so I want to make sure that you get a chance to get up, get something to get some water, stretch your legs a little bit. When we take the next break, I will grab a 10 gig module, and we'll take a look at that. We'll see where the 10 gig module comes in. So for those of you that have just joined on, just to reiterate as well, this session is being recorded, and a recorded version will be sent out to everybody that attended this class. All right, so we're going to find that this unit supports both Wi-Fi and wired connectivity connectivity testing, network services testing, and we're going to go through and I'm going to show you how we can build a number of different network services. So I can use this as a way to not only make sure that at layer 3 I can send out a ping and a device is going to reply, but that at layer 4, or really at our application layer, that we are getting a response back from those servers on the TCP ports we expect to have open. So this means if I'm deploying a new application and I know which servers need to be available and what ports need to be open on those servers, we're going to be able to build a test with this piece of equipment to make sure that that's working. We're going to be able to do some network performance testing. So we're going to use this in combination with another OneTouch AT, and we're going to use it with a LinkRunner AT2000 to show how we can do both wired and Wi-Fi performance testing. We can set this up to do periodic testing. So let's say that I had some folks complaining about connectivity over time at a remote location. We're going to be able to set up the OneTouch AT G3 so that it is going out and periodically running tests and then uploading those results to Link Live. We're going to take a look at Link Live and what we can do as far as being able to go in and take a look at the test results. And that's where our cloud-based results management comes in. That this piece of equipment has the ability to take those test results each time we run them and upload those to Link Live, and I can compile all those results together. One of the big benefits of Link Live is that if I have a number of these testers deployed out through my organization, I can not only use Link Live as a way to pull all those test results together, but we're going to see that we can go in and we can remote control the OneTouch AT through Link Live. So this means I can send the OneTouch AT out to a remote location. They plug it in, they turn it on, it gets an IP address, it connects to Link Live. At that point, that OneTouch AT is going to show up in that Link Live screen as being available for remote connectivity. We can remote into it, we can drive it just like we were sitting in front of it. In fact, what's really nice is as we're driving it, the screen is changing at the same time. So this means that somebody could be sitting out at that remote location looking at the screen or showing me something. So it's a great way that if you are anywhere else in the world, you can connect into the OneTouch AT and be able to look over the shoulder of the person that's driving it. We're going to take a look at some VoIP analysis. We'll bring a VoIP phone in here. We'll connect that up. Our Wi-Fi discovery and analysis. In fact, I will tell you that when it comes to capturing wireless traffic, it does not get any easier than using the OneTouch AT G2. We're going to show how just through about 4 clicks, we can go from being able to see all the devices that are out there to being able to drill in to that device we're interested in and start capturing those wireless frames. And we'll take a look at the remote visibility. Okay. So, one of the questions is, what's the difference between the OneTouch AT and the OneTouch AT G2? The biggest difference between the OneTouch AT and the OneTouch AT G2 is that the G2 supports 802.11 AC wireless. It's got 3 antennas in it. It also supports the ability to detect interference sources. So when I go in and we start taking a look at things like interferers when it comes to Wi-Fi, if you have a OneTouch AT, you're not going to see that screen. So that is the biggest difference that we're going to see when it comes to the OneTouch AT and the OneTouch AT G2 is that 802.11 AC capability. All right, so when it comes to our wired side on our OneTouch AT G2, we can do 10 base T, 100 base T, we can do gig copper, we can also do 100 base FX. And I was pretty sure on that one. I just wanted to make sure before I said it definitively. But if we plug a 100 base FX SFP into this, it'll work. So in some manufacturing environments, we see 100 meg over fiber going out to test equipment or manufacturing equipment. We can use this as a way to go in and validate that. We can also plug in a gig SFP in there. We can connect to our fiber. So this allows us, we can put LX, SX, depending on what we need to do there. As far as wireless, 802.11a, b, n, we can do 20 megahertz, 40 megahertz on N, and we can do up to 80 megahertz on 802.11 AC. So what we're going to find is when we go in and connect with this, we can do throughput testing and really start pushing that 802.11 AC up there to the maximum throughput. We're going to do that. We will connect to our AC AP here in the office, and we'll connect in and do some troubleshooting. Another one, and this is something that I really like, is the inline analysis and capture. And so the inline analysis and capture allows us to get in the path of the packets. So you notice on the top of the unit there, and I'm just going to, let's see, we'll flip over here. There we go. We'll flip over here, and what you notice is that we've got, these are our 2 SFPs. And somebody said, what does SFP stand for? I believe it is small form factor pluggable, but we can look that one up. But I've got a copper SFP right here. We'll dig out a fiber one, but here's an example of our copper SFP. So we could take and plug this in right there, and that would actually add another copper port. Really no need for that in this particular unit, but I can go inline between fiber to fiber. I can do copper to copper, or I can do copper to fiber. So I can actually use this to do media conversion. And so if I was in a case where I needed to go from a fiber connection on this side to a copper connection on this side for testing, I could do that. But this allows me to get in line, and what we're going to see with the inline is that this supports 802.3 AF power over Ethernet. So if I have a power device, such as a wireless access point or a phone, this will pass PoE. In fact, as it passes the PoE, it's going to show us what our voltage and current draw is. So it's a very nice feature for being able to get in line and see what's going on when it comes to PoE devices. Okay? Now, on the side of this unit, we've got a USB port. Well, we've got a couple of USB ports on one side, and this can be used to connect to our wireless network, or for, our management port. So what I'll do, and I don't have the little adapter, that's another one I'll grab on the break, but we can plug a USB wireless adapter into this, and we can use it to get to the management port. And the beautiful thing about being able to get to the management port is that we can use this as a way to remotely control the OneTouch AT. In fact, if we just slide over here, here's my OneTouch AT right here. So if I came in and clicked on test, it's going out and it's going to start a test on our local network here, and it's going to show us what our test results look like. So in this case, we're able to connect at 1 gig full duplex. We're connected to a PoE connection. We got 45 volts at 13.13 watts. It shows us so we connected to storeroom switch 2. We got our default router, our DHCP server, our DNS. We've discovered 42 devices on the network. So in this case, we're able to plug in and get a quick idea of what our connectivity looks like. I am driving this by using, in this case, a VNC viewer to connect to my OneTouch AT G2. We can also do this through Link Live, and we'll show you how to do that as we roll along here. But what this means is, like in a case like this, I can drive this remotely, be able to show it up on the screen, and you can see it. We don't have to try and shoot it with a camera over my shoulder. Okay. Now, we also have a copper port on here. So if we were to, again, come back over to this particular unit, and I were to turn this around, we're going to say, okay, over here on this side, I've got this copper port right here. Now, this copper port is connected to our local network. This is how I'm remote controlling it. So I can either connect in with my copper port right here, or, like I said, I'll show you, we can plug a USB wireless adapter in here, and I'll show you the model that I'm using, but we can use that as a way to connect the management port wirelessly. So if I'm walking around with my OneTouch AT, then I can be connected to my wireless network, and I could be remoted into this piece of equipment. Okay, I'll switch over to that one. All right, now this management port, whether we use the wireless interface through the USB connection or we use the wired port, again, allows us to remote control the unit. Also, it allows us to communicate back to Link Live doing that. Okay. Now, the OneTouch AT 10G. So this is what the 10G module looks like. In fact, I'm going to turn this off for just a second because we're going to talk about the modules. But we see that it has many of the same wired functions as the OneTouch AT and the OneTouch AT G2. So what happened initially was that this module came out as the performance test remote for the OptiView XG. As time went along, the OneTouch AT features were added to it. So this has 10 gig copper and fiber interfaces. So I can plug an SFP Plus, and that's my 10 gig SFP, into this connection, and I can connect this at either 10 gig copper or 10 gig fiber. We can use this in combination with the OptiView XG for doing 10 gig throughput testing. So from a validation standpoint, I can use this standalone to connect to my 10 gig network and ensure that the services I expect are available, and I can connect to 10 gig. If I use this in combination with the OptiView XG, I can transmit and receive traffic at full line rate 10 gig and validate that my network infrastructure is providing that 10 gig connectivity that I expect. Now, when I do that testing with the OptiView, it supports up to 4 concurrent streams. So I could have a voice stream, and I could have a data stream, and I could make sure QoS is working. Now, if you have Gold or Master Care support on your performance test remote, let's say you had a performance test remote, you have support, you can upgrade this to a OneTouch AT 10G. but you have to have the 10 gig module to get that 10 gig capability. Now let me just switch back over here again, and we're going to switch over to this unit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unplug my Ethernet cable right there, and what we're going to see is on the back right here, we've got these two little levers. And I'm going to flip those two levers out, and this module comes off. And this is our OneTouch AT G2 module. So if I had a 10 gig module, which I'll go grab in a few minutes, I can take that 10 gig module, put it on the back of my mainframe there, lock that in, and now I turn that on. Now the software is stored in the module. So when I turn it on, what it's going to do is it is going to go out and it's going to load that software up from the module. So if I change from the G2 module to the 10 gig module, it will automatically switch that software in the mainframe over. Okay? So let me just take a quick look here. Let's see, when I plug in a copper or fiber SFP in the AT-G2, the LED on the device doesn't turn on like yours. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. I always want to make sure that, and that's why I have these units, set up here, is I want to make sure that if there's any questions that we test that out. So we'll go ahead and connect that up to fiber. Okay, and how does the OneTouch AT wireless functionality differ from the AirCheck G2 tester? That's a good one. So what we're going to see is that with the OneTouch AT, some of the big differences with the AirCheck, and in fact, I've just been putting some training together on the AirCheck, so I've been spending a lot of time with it. What we're going to find is that with the AirCheck's going to show us things like our non-802.11 wireless traffic. So if I have an interference device, I'm going to see that show up as non-802.11. If I have the OneTouch AT G2, it will help me identify what type of device is causing that interference. Also, one of the big factors, this allows us to do our performance testing on our Wi-Fi network, so I can transmit data using the OneTouch AT G2 to make sure that not only can I connect to my wireless network, but I can get good throughput out of that network. It also allows me to do packet capture. So some of the big differences is our OneTouch AT G2 is going to let us do packet capture, it's going to let us do performance testing on our wireless network, and it's going to help us identify our interference sources. The AirCheck G2 is a phenomenal device for checking our connectivity. I just used one for helping us troubleshoot why we couldn't get connected. It gives us a great log as far as what's going on out there, helping us locate access points. So we find that AirCheck G2 is a phenomenal frontline troubleshooting tool. So I can give that to someone. I can go out and say, hey, make sure we have connectivity out in this area. But when it comes to doing things like packet capture, that's where our OneTouch AT really comes in. And what's nice is that I can capture on the wireless side, and that lets me see what's happening with my wireless traffic. I can also capture on the wired side. So if I can't decrypt those wireless traffics because I'm using something like WPA2 Enterprise, I can put this in line with the wireless access point and capture those wireless packets on that side as well. Okay. So when we get to the wireless, I see I've got another question in here. When we get to the wireless, I will dig in and we'll see if we can make sure that we get that information. One of them was about the signal to noise ratio for each AP. So we'll take a look at that when we get to that particular section. All right. So let's get rolling. We've got quite a bit to cover. And some of this we're going to work on getting through fairly quickly, but I want to make sure that we get all of this covered. So we're going to start out with Module 1, taking a look at our network settings, and we're going to get into some tests, reports, wired network discovery, etc. So Module number 1, configuring our network settings. So we're going to go through very quickly and look at some of the key factors when we're going in and configuring our OneTouch AT. So the first step is to configure our network parameters. Now the nice thing is all of these network parameters are stored in our profile. So if you create a profile, this information is going to be stored in that profile. So that's great. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on that little toolbox icon down there. So in the lower left corner, we're going to see that we've got some tools. And when we click on those, it's going to bring up our tools menu. Now we can move up and down on this menu by swiping up and down. If I switch over, well, let's see, where did I must have accidentally closed my VNC viewer. Let's open that back up again. See if we can get it back over here. We'll say continue. Now in this case, and we'll talk about this, I've set up security on my OneTouch AT G2 so that if somebody's going to go in and connect to it either via VNC or through the web interface, that they have to have the right user ID and password. So let's open that up so it's nice and big and easy to see. So if I click on my tools right there, it takes me over here. Now, I can take and to scroll up and down, if I'm remoted in, I'm going to hit page down or page up. So I can use the arrow or I can use the pages. If I'm going to, let's see, let's switch to this one. If I'm going to be using that touch screen, well, this way you can see both of them. If I'm going to be using the touch screen, in this case, I can drag it up or drag it down. So you notice that as I drag it up and drag it down on the screen, it changes. So we can use that either way there. Okay. So I'll hit back. So I'm going to click on the screen just because it's a little bit easier right here. We'll switch back to that right there. So let's come over here. We'll page up. There we go. So this takes us into things like our wired settings. So let's start taking a look at some of those settings in there. Okay. So we're going to start with wired. So if we go into wired, we can enable or disable wired. Why would we do this? If I'm doing a lot of wireless testing, I don't want the wired tests to try and run. So I can go in and hit off on my wired connection. The same holds true for wireless. If I'm doing wired work, don't care about wireless, just go ahead and disable it. Again, this is saved in the profile, so I could create a wired profile, a wireless profile. It would automatically have these turned off or on. Okay, and it just speeds up the testing process because we're not even going to try and run those tests. Okay, so we see that those are all saved as part of the profile. When it comes to speed and duplex, we can go in and change that. This is not something I typically change, but again, having a tool where we can change it if we need to is a very nice feature. Okay, so we're going to run past that one. Configuring PoE. The OneTouch AT supports PoE. So not only will it pass PoE, but it will also test to make sure PoE is working. So in this case, I can come in and say enable PoE. Now it's important to note, if you enable PoE and the connection you're connected to does not have PoE, the test will fail. So we want to enable power over Ethernet on connections that are going to have power over Ethernet. So enabling this will cause the OneTouch AT to tell the device at the other end that it is a powered device and that device, that power source, can send our 802.3 AF power out to this device. Okay. Now, here's kind of an interesting one, and this is a patented feature of this particular tool, as well as we've got it in the Link Runner AT2000. and that is the ability to request a particular class of service. So with PoE, I could say, just send me PoE. Or I could go in and say, this is the amount of power that I need. So if I know what type of device I'm connecting to the other end, I can come in here and specify my PoE class. So when you're building your test parameters, you're building your test configuration, this is one of those things that's good to know. What type of PoE do we need? How much current do we need to have? Okay. Now the other thing, before we leave that, I'm going to come back here. We have our enable TruePower. Now what we'll find, in fact, let's just switch over and we're going to go back out to our front screen. And I'm going to click on test. Now we can either hit the test button on the front of the unit, or we can hit the test on the screen. Now if I'm doing it remotely, hitting test on the screen seems to work the best. So we see that we've got PoE. So when we come in here, we're going to find that when I've selected PoE, we get our green check mark right there. We're going to talk more about when would this fail. But if I click on that link, I'll just go back and show that to you again. I clicked on that blue line, and I could either touch it with my finger, or I can click on it with my mouse right here. If I come into PoE, what we see is that we requested class 3 PoE, so 13 watts. We received class 3. Our power source equipment type is a type 1. We got 48 volts. We see that our power came across pairs 1, 2, and 3, 6. Our true power voltage. What is true power? True power is a patented process that NetScout uses for verifying that we are getting that amount of current. Now, one of the things I've found is if we have high resistance on the link, and in fact, I've started using a lot of these 28 gauge patch cords for my training because they're small, they're easy to carry around. The thing I found is over time, the more those get coiled and uncoiled, we start seeing our ability to support PoE go down. It's a very thin cable. As it starts getting worked, that resistance goes up. So with TruePower, we actually put that 13 watts of load on the connection to see what our voltage is. So this tells us that when we didn't have a load on the connection, we got 48 volts. When we did put a load on the connection, we got 45. Now, I've got a little table that gives us those voltage ranges. We're going to see that coming up in just a bit. Okay. So one of the questions is, what protocol are the PoE classes linked? And what we're going to find is that we request those classes. We can do it through CDP, our Cisco Discovery Protocol. We can also do it through LLDP. So this is the way of our end device letting the other device know what class of service. And that really comes into play with class 4. With the other classes, it's determining how much current we're going to draw from that device. So how much resistance are we going to put on this link to draw that amount of current? So this is a great way to help us troubleshoot problems with our wiring infrastructure when it comes to PoE, at least as far as being able to tell we're not getting enough power. Okay, we're going to talk more about, we'll get more into PoE in just a bit. 802.1x. So if you have an environment where you support 802.1x authentication, and that's required to connect to the network, the OneTouch AT supports that. So we can configure it with the 802.1x configuration information, and when the unit connects to the network, it'll pass this information so that it can get authenticated and connect up. All right, so getting an IP address. The OneTouch AT G3 supports both DHCP and static. So if I'm in an environment where I don't have a DHCP server, I can set it to static. Or if I support DHCP, I can leave it to DHCP. It also supports a couple of other things, and that's IPv6. If you are deploying IPv6 in your network, we can have this go out and get an IPv6 address. Keep in mind, if we tell it to get an IPv6 address and it cannot, the test will fail. So as we build our test parameters and we're looking for a pass-fail. And let me come back out to my home screen right here. When everything passes, we get that green bar up at the top. So in most cases, we want to set these tests up so that we get that green bar. It's a great visual indication that we are past our tests and everything is working properly. So I can come in and I could create a separate profile for each network where I have a static address, and I could use that to connect up. Okay. Also, it supports a user MAC address. Why would I want to change the MAC address? So it shows my MAC address right down here. Why would I want to change that for my OneTouch? Well, if I did a DHCP reservation, I could use the static, or I could change the MAC address of my OneTouch to match that reservation I put into DHCP, and I could check and make sure that reservation worked. So this again gives me a way to go in and validate that something I configured on the network is working properly. So if I set static, if I say I'm going to use a static IP address, then what it does is it opens up all these other options. So when I click on static, we can put in our IP address, put in our subnet mask, our default gateway, our DNS servers. So it allows me to go in and configure that information. Okay. The OneTouch AT also supports 802.1q VLAN tagging. Now this is a really nice feature for a number of reasons. One is, if I have this connected to a VLAN trunk port, then I can go out and I can specify my VLAN tag, and I can move from one VLAN to another. And you may have noticed, in addition to testing to make sure that all my key services were available, I also went out and did a discovery of the devices on the network. So if I'm plugged into a VLAN trunk port, I can move from one VLAN to the next and run this discovery. So one of the places that I like to leave this connected, if I'm not using it for anything else, is I can connect one of my ports up there on the top to a VLAN trunk. If I need to do a discovery of VLAN 12, I can come in here and I can click on my tools. I can go into wired. I can come in here to VLAN, and I can turn on my tag, and I could switch to VLAN number 12. So I can just click on 1, 2, and I'll hit done. When I do this, every packet transmitted by the OneTouch AT G3 goes out with a tag, an 802.1q VLAN tag of VLAN 12. So this allows me to use it to discover by being plugged into a trunk port. I'm going to turn this off because I'll forget I turned it on and it'll cause me some issues. I'll show you where it shows up though when we do show you how that VLAN tagging works. It also is a great way to validate my VLANs are working properly. If somebody gives me a connection and they say, Mike, this connection has these VLANs on it, I can come back in with my OneTouch AT G3 and I can validate that every one of those VLANs is available at the end of that connection. Pretty nice feature in there. Okay. Now, there's one other one on there, and I don't have that in the slide, and that's wait for a receive frame. Now, this really comes in with spanning tree, and that is that we find that when we have spanning tree enabled, if we don't have something like port fast and Cisco enabled, spanning tree will listen for 30 seconds to make sure there's not a loop before it starts forwarding packets. Now, this could be an issue in getting a DHCP address, because we could start sending out DHCP discovers, and the switch isn't allowing us to forward, it's not forwarding any of our packets for that first 30 seconds. So if we turn on wait for receive frame, what the OneTouch AT G3 will do is it will wait till it hears a frame from the switch before it starts sending any frames. And if you have a network without a lot of traffic on it, we can sit there for a while waiting before we try and get our DHCP address. So a lot of times, if I want to run the test quickly, I'll go ahead and turn this off, and the OneTouch will just start sending frames immediately. Okay. So let's come back up here. All right. So Mike, how does Discovery Protocol work? Okay, what kind of packets does the OneTouch send out to detect devices on the network? So I'll tell you what, I'm going to hold off on that one just a little bit till we get into Discovery, but I will say that what this will do is this will ARP all the devices in the network that we're trying to discover. So it'll look at what network it's on, it'll send out ARPs, it'll look for what devices reply to those ARPs, and then it will go out and start querying those devices. And we're going to get to analysis here in just a second, but it will send SNMP queries to those devices, and it will go out and try and figure out, is that an SNMP device? It'll listen, does it hear routing protocols such as RIP? Does it hear OSPF? If it does, then it's going to put that into certain categories. So it's going to listen to what type of packets are being sent out by devices to help us figure out what type of what's out there and how those devices are connected. Okay. All right. Yeah, one of the questions is there a way to discover VLANs published on a trunk? No, and I would love to see that. That would be a really nice feature. I will show you that we could do a packet capture and collect that information, but as far as being able to tell us all the VLANs that are on a port, not there, but boy, that would be a very nice feature to have in there. I'll make sure I add that to the list of feature requests that I always send in. All right, so let's switch back here. We'll come back. Wi-Fi, okay? So when it comes to Wi-Fi, there's a number of features, and we see that we have the same thing. We can enable Wi-Fi. We can select what bands of Wi-Fi we want to use. So if you're not using 5 gig, then we just turn that off, because it's going to be going through scanning through the channels. So if we can eliminate channels that we don't care about, that's great. Let's eliminate those. So we'll work our way down. We can say, we want both 2.4 and 5, or we want just 5 or just 2.4. When the Enable Connect is off, all we do is listen. So if we came over to ours and we click on Wi-Fi, and I'm going to enable the Wi-Fi, but I'm going to turn off Enable Connect. So what we'll find is that when we go back out here to our home screen, and I click on Test, it's going to run through our wireless tests, and it's going to make sure that we can connect to our wired network. On the wireless side, it's going to listen to what's out there wirelessly, but it's not going to try and connect to our wireless network. So this is a great way that if I didn't know what wireless networks are out there, we see that it starts scanning through those channels. And if I click on that little magnifying glass right there, it's going to bring up my wireless screen. It's going to show me what networks are out there and give me some information. Now, if I wanted to make sure that I had the same connectivity on the wireless side as I do on the wired side, well, then that's where we come into our Wi-Fi and we enable Connect. Now, when I enable Connect, this is where I'll come in and specify an SSID. So if I click on SSID, it gives me a list of all the SSIDs we can see on that OneTouch AT G3 out here in the studio. So this gives me a list of my networks. If that SSID is not beaconing and does not show up in this list, we can go in and click and add that SSID manually. After I select the SSID, I will select what type of security is being used with that SSID. So this is where I can go in and enter my passphrase, etc. So I give it the information necessary to connect up to that network. And now I'm ready to go. So if we came back and I hit test, now that I've got Enable Connect turned on, not only is it going to connect on the wired side, but it's going to connect on the wireless side. And any tests I create will be run on both wired and wireless. Okay. So we'll let that run back there. We'll click through a few of these. So here's our Wi-Fi SSID. So when I do enable connect, just like you saw, it brought down a list of those SSIDs. This is where we can go in and configure our authentication and encryption protocols that we're going to use. So, we could say, is it open shared, auto open shared, WPA personal, 2, WPA enterprise, WPA2 enterprise, legacy 802.1x. So we can choose that type of authentication that network's going to use. Just as we had on the wired side, I can either get an IP address via DHCP, or I can statically configure the wireless MAC, IPv4 address, and I can set up a IPv6 address. So we can go in and configure this information up. Okay. And I just realized, let me just move forward here just a second. I'll come back to those. Yep. Okay. So the reason I'm kind of hemming and hawing here is I need to, at break, I will re-export this presentation. This particular presentation, I just realized not all my screens are changed. No big deal. All the screens really look the same. It's just that I need to re-export one of my presentations. So we'll do that at break. No big deal. I was just curious if it was just one slide or a number of slides. All right. So in this case, we can configure up our authentication. Let's see. What time is it? Well, you know what? It is 10 to the hour. Now would be a great time to take a break. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to take a break. And I'm going to fix my slides real quick. I'm going to grab a OneTouch AT 10 gig module. And we'll be back in just a second. I want to make sure that we've got the right slides up here. Great time to take a break. So with that said, let me just come in here. I'm just going to grab my little break timer right here. And we're going to take a 10-minute break. And we'll be right back.